Hello everybody, it's Merlin here, and I'm doing another requested vlog for you. This one is a big debate. As you guys know, I am something of a Spider-Man fan. He's basically my favorite superhero. So the question that was posed to me are, what are my thoughts on the whole Tobey Maguire versus Andrew Garfield debate? Basically the Sam Raimi trilogy versus the Mark Webb duology, because I guess they aren't making any more movies, between those two versions of the characters. Now, I think the question was specifically about the versions of Spider-Man and not the movies themselves, so I'll try to keep that out of the debate. People might think that I'm biased. I mean, on Film Fanatics, I've had some discussions with my colleague Justin on it, and we have some radically different opinions. We've had a couple intense arguments, I think, on and off the air about it, but, you know, some of his feelings are justified, and so are mine. But that's not the point. The point is, it's a heated debate, and there are fans on both sides for different reasons. I feel like for a lot of people that are into Spider-Man comics, very much like I was, grew up liking the character, grew up maybe with the classic stories, being exposed to them when they were a kid, and feeling like the Sam Raimi movies and their Tobey Maguire Spider-Man actually fit that character well. And growing up and having experienced more recent storylines and how the character's evolved and how he's generally been portrayed in more recent years, Andrew Garfield was closer. Which, it's kind of funny, now that I really look at all of Spider-Man comics in general, neither of those statements is correct. We'll get this off the bat. Which one do I think is better? Well, it's really, okay, it is difficult because I actually recently watched the original Spider-Man movies, not necessarily in preparation for this video, but just because they were on demand and I said, yeah, why not? And you know what? I got through them. I found them relatively enjoyable. They had issues, but you know what? They were all right. They're pretty good. They're decent. They're pretty good movies. I don't think they're up to the hype they were when they originally came out, but you know, they're good quality films. And I think that the Amazing Spider-Man films are at least on the same level. They're just very different. They're just very different, and that's the problem. Between the two versions of the characters, the thing about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man that they get right, he does a really good job at how he's written, how he portrays the really nerdy, unsure of himself, unconfident version of Peter Parker when he started at the beginning of the series and early in his career. So for the first movie, maybe the second movie, even the third movie, if that's what he's going for, it's actually fairly close. It is. It's still based upon the stereotypical idea of the geeky nerd in the 1960s, much like the movies themselves, and the silliness and campiness of it, but he does do a good job with that. And another thing about that version of Spider-Man, as well as those movies, they capture how crappy it is to be Peter Parker. The drama, the intense drama, the sadness, the angst, they capture that perfectly, which is kind of ironic considering how campy and silly the movies generally are. Those dramatic scenes are still really good. The problem is, most of those scenes aren't when he's Spider-Man. And that's the big problem. I admit that Peter Parker, when he's unsure of himself in his younger years, and those dramatic moments, and a lot of that angst and self-hate, yes, that's a big part of Spider-Man's character, and I think that that is done well with that version. It's true. But the problem is, when it comes to the fun and the humor of the Spider-Man persona, it's virtually non-existent. And the few jokes they toss in there are not good. I mean, it goes beyond just being corny. They're just not very good. They're really lame jokes, and there are very few of them. If you're going to do that, make more of them. So I just find that interesting because it's Sam Raimi. You think that that would be easier for him. But no, the humor is a huge part of Spider-Man's character and his portrayal. And the thing is, that's really what was lacking if you're just talking about the character. So really, they got Peter Parker in his early years correct. But in terms of how he was supposed to grow throughout the movies, you know, it's kind of mixed. And the humor of the character of Spider-Man is not there, which is a huge part of why people like him. He's snarky. So it's about 50-50 there. Now, for Andrew Garfield's character, his version of Spider-Man also got the angst right, also got, to some degree, the geekiness right, though they made him more of a generalized loner character with his, you know, his skateboards and his nice hair and everything. So he was a little more relatable in some ways, less in others, but he was not the traditional geeky Peter Parker, but he was still the loner. You know, he was still intelligent, he was still unconfident, you know, he mumbled, he was, had difficulty asking the girl out, he got beaten up, but he stuck up for the little guy, which I thought was pretty cool. So that aspect of Peter Parker was also there, just not portrayed in the more traditional way. And also, the humor of the Spider-Man facade was there, which it was not in the original. So, really, does Andrew Garfield come off a bit like an arrogant douche sometimes? Yeah, but then again, so was Spider-Man when he got his powers, and so are a lot of teenagers. And was Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man really kind of whiny and full of self-hate and angst? So was Spider-Man. So are teenagers. I know that the Nostalgia Critic did a video kind of discussing something like this a while ago, and I think he had a pretty good point. I think that neither version is the perfect version of Spider-Man, but I think they both encapsulate different aspects of the character better than the other one does. I mean, with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, in terms of the character's early years, and I mean real early years because, the thing is, Peter Parker actually kind of got out of his shell and became much more confident and less overtly geeky when Stan Lee was writing him. I mean, he got to college and then he kind of got past a lot of that. The angst was still there, and he was still a big geek, but his lack of confidence was for the most part gone. And that's something that just kind of was persistent with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, which seemed like it was lacking his development. Plus, the humor wasn't there. And if you're going to be Spider-Man, you got to be funny. You got to be talkative. It's just the way it has to be. With Andrew Garfield, I think they had a more balanced version of the character. And I think that, yes, it wasn't perfect, but I think it was closer to the way Spider-Man's generally been portrayed throughout most of his career. Would I have portrayed him as kind of this hipster skateboarder kid? Maybe not, but I do think that times change. And the reason that works better is that because Peter Parker doesn't have to be a stereotypical 60s nerd. He's representative of all kids that feel angsty and feel alone and awkward, and they don't all have to look and act exactly the same. He's a little more universal in that sense, which I think is actually a little better than Tobey's. The movies themselves have different problems, but in terms of both, I think that it's kind of a mix and match. There are good things about Tobey, there are good things about Andrew Garfield. But if you want to ask me which one I prefer, once again, it's tough because I have sort of a nostalgic attachment to the original movies. I loved Spider-Man so much when I was a kid that seeing him on screen, I actually had very few problems with the character. I actually really liked it. I really did. But years later, when comparing the two, I really do have a hard time getting behind that lack of humor. Spider-Man should be a little more fun some of the time. I know that his stories can be dark, but his humor is a huge part of his portrayal. It's kind of like my issue with Batman and the Christopher Nolan movies. I actually think their version of Bruce Wayne is a pretty good one. And I think he's portrayed well, but their version of him as Batman and what the character's all about is a little bit different. So I prefer the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man a little bit more overall. I think that he's closer to the way Spider-Man should ultimately be, but he's not perfect either. So maybe one day, with this new kit, Marvel will finally get it right since they have rights to the character. Alright guys, what are your thoughts on this debate? Are you guys like Tobey Maguire more, Andrew Garfield more? What do you want to see from the new Spider-Man that Marvel's going to be coming out with? I guess it's going to be in Captain America. Alright, until then, Merlin out. Peace.